In the late 70s and early 80s, electronic music was on the rise. Digital synthesizers were beginning to replace their analog counterparts, and sequencers began to gain a foothold in the industry. But there was one problem. A big problem. How do we get all these fancy new instruments to talk to each other? At this point in time, there was no industry standard for syncing up electronic instruments. CV-Gate, DIN-Sync, and DCB were the three big players. But even then, these standards weren't intercompatible, and same standard functionality between brands was a crapshoot. Ikutaro Takahashi, the president of Roland at the time, felt that this hodgepodge of standards was hindering the industry. In June 1981, he proposed the idea for a new standard to Tom Oberheim, who had already developed his own proprietary interface, simply called the Oberheim system. But Takahashi felt that this standard was overcomplicated and cumbersome. He wanted something simpler that, at the same time, would keep up with the rapidly advancing tech of digital music. So, he turned to Dave Smith, the at-time president of Sequential Circuits. This sparked quite a fancy, and soon, talks of both American and Japanese music companies were underway. It was time to move on from all these proprietary standards. The industry needed something that was simple and cheap, yet foolproof and expandable. Something that manufacturers and consumers alike couldn't possibly screw up. At the 1983 Winter NAMM show, Dave Smith demonstrated a MIDI connection between two synthesizers. The initial reaction? At first, onlookers were astounded by what they saw. Two completely different synths, from both sides of the world respectively, were playing nicely for just these two cables? It must be magic! But it wasn't. In fact, it was quite real. MIDI was here to stay, despite some critics complaining that it was too simple or had no precise timing features. Following an open meeting at the 1984 Summer NAMM show, the MMA was formed. No, not that MMA, the MIDI Manufacturers Association. Although, to be fair, there would be some fighting between Roland and Yamaha eventually. It soon became clear that the basic MIDI standard was a little bit restrictive for these fancy new synthesizers. Selecting different instruments entirely was fine. But what about variations of said instruments, along with effects? That was something which basic MIDI did lack. As a result, Roland introduced the GS standard in 1991, whereas Yamaha introduced the XG guidelines in 1994. Guys, hold up a minute. Where did the common standards go? Ultimately, since Roland was still the industry standard, GS won this battle, even if Yamaha's XG was more advanced. MIDI did eventually receive an update, at first by Roland in 1999 with General MIDI Level 2, then officially in 2020 as a separate standard, simply called MIDI 2.0. And in the present day, how does MIDI hold up? Well, it's still everywhere. Now on a more personal note, I use MIDI every single day. You've already seen my two synths on the desk here, a Roland Sound Canvas D70 and an Akai SG-01K, both of which I write music with. And guess what? The Roland is from 2001, the Akai is from 1995, and they both work perfectly together like they were made at the same time. And all because of MIDI. That one magic music cable. Thanks for watching Antiques of Yesterday. I've been your host Braden, and now I'm gonna grab some headphones and jam out. See you next time.